Great. Thank you very much. And so I had a great introduction on in-field games. Now I will give you an example where we can see application to systemic risk. So let me rush a little bit on the first part of the talk so I can get to in-field game and games. Okay, so, well, this doesn't work. Doesn't work. Yeah, it's you. Well, so let me stay here. A little bit of advertising here, systemic risk. So, but I show that first because some of the people in the room have been contributing to this volume. It's kind of 1,000 pages, 11 chapters, looking at systemic risk from many points of view. And instead of commenting on that, I want to give you also where this is coming from, because it's maybe more interesting. So we know that in 2007, 2008, we had the financial crisis. And a group of people, of friends and colleagues from academia, from industry, got together on Skype every week and tried to promote the idea of forming a National Institute of Finance in the US. That was needed. We have an NIH, we have an NSF, we don't have an NIF. So for 2 years we worked trying to design this institute. Collecting data, what kind of data we need, doing the research, what kind of research should be done, how this could be structured. And amazingly, this made its way to politics. And then in 2010, as you all know, we had the Dodd-Frank bill. And this Dodd-Frank bill contains the creation of the Office of Financial Research, which is under the Treasury Department. And this Office of Financial Research is basically what we wanted as an NIF, except that we wanted the NIF to be independent, and OFR is not independent, it's under the Treasury. So this has been created, and actually it's acting right now. A director has been nominated last year, an advisory board has been formed. I have the pleasure to be on this advisory board, so I see from the front row what is going on at OFR. But it's building up, and I can just tell you, I won't tell you too much, but one of the main issues is data. Which data we need, how to collect the data, how to structure the data, and then research has been a little bit on the back burner, and I want to bring that more up front on research. So this is what is going on, and I think it's worth mentioning. So let's go back to mathematics. I want just a couple of words on the difference between credit risk and systemic risk. In credit risk, and I have in mind the structural approach and the first passage time, first hitting time in credit. So in credit, we have these log values, let's say log values of firms or stock, whatever you want, but these are log values. But they are diffusions, and everything is in a correlation, or the way you correlate those diffusions. That's where the credit risk is. And you have three ingredients. You have the drift, the volatility, and the shocks, the Brownian motion, let's say. In this case, I'm taking Brownian motions. So you have three things. But in credit risk, actually, basically you don't touch the drift. The drift is, you're bound by risk neutrality. Anytime you price something, the drift, basically, you cannot touch it. And the way to correlate those quantities is through the Brownian motions or the volatility. If you do it through the Brownian motion, so this has been done, of course, but then you face the problem that the joint law of fitting times of correlated Brownian motion is not a simple thing to deal with, and that's a surprise, but this you have to deal with. You can also correlate the volatility if you want to create correlation through volatility. This has been done. I have a paper, and then we have done quite a lot of work in that direction. So this is a situation for credit risk. I don't want to get into that. This is a way to correlate diffusions. Now, systemic risk is a little bit different. Well, it looks the same, except that now, let's say, suppose X are log monetary reserve, money, right? Log money. So everything is log, so I don't care about signs yet. So again, we have our diffusion model, and I want to create correlations. Now I can play with the drift because those are not traded quantities, right? So what I will do here is try to propose a very simple model where I will freeze the volatility, I will freeze the Brownian motion. And freeze, I mean I will make it very simple. So let's say, for instance, I will assume that the Brownian motions are independent, not to mix with correlation between Brownian motion, and I will create coupling of those diffusions through the drift. So volatilities are constant, Brownian motion independent, and I want to propose a model, very simple model, to explain systemic risk. Okay, so here is my model. Very simple model. You will see how it goes. It's extremely simple. There is no game here. I will put game later on. And actually, this model may seem very, very simple. And when we will put games and we will solve the equilibrium, we'll find this kind of model. So this has actually a posteriori some intrinsic value. So this is a model of lending and borrowing, right? So you see here that bank I, if bank I is smaller than bank J, it receives money from bank J, and vice versa. So this is lending and borrowing at a rate, and the rate, the parameter which fixes the rate is A. Think about A as liquidity. A is large, money is flowing very fast between banks, right? So you have these birds. So this is the model of birds. I should have music here, but so these are birds. They are attracting to each other, right? They attract to each other. So, or you can think about this as OUs. It's kind of OUs. Everybody is attracted to everybody, and that's a little bit the idea of flocking or herding. So in the banks. Now, where is the systemic risk? Let's declare that a bank default if it reaches a level. Okay, so a bank is defaulting if it reaches the level D. These are logs, so D is negative. Let's make it simple, the same for everybody. And you have a time horizon T. Let's assume that you have a default if you hit the default level before T. The bank stays in the system. I don't want to make it very complicated. It stays in the system, continue to borrow and lend, but we count the defaults, right? And let's look at the behavior of this system for not so large number of banks, 10, and increase the liquidity. I like to think about A as liquidity. So let's look at this picture. So on the left is our model. On the right, A equals 0, independent Brownian motion, and same shocks. So this is one realization of 10 banks, right? So you see that if A equals 1, but basically there is not much going on. It seems that to be the same as independent. Or now if I do A equals 10, now I see my flocking. Right? I see that everybody is stable. The system is very stable in this case. You can see it on the right, not. On the right, they are independent. And the number of default on that trajectory, this is one trajectory, right? One realization. The number of default is 0. And let's make it 100. Well, now everything is very stable. So it seems that borrowing and lending creates stability. Oh, obviously, right? You save the small bank. The big bank is putting money in the system, and then you have stability. That's exactly what is going on. So let's look at the loss distribution. Loss distribution is the number of default. Let's look at the distribution. So again, if they are independent, of course, I can compute that. I know exactly what is the distribution of first passage, and I will get a binomial with this parameter. Right? So I can compare my binomial with the loss distribution when I have this coupling. So A equals 1, nothing much is happening. The loss distribution is basically the same. Here I'm blowing out the tail because I want to look at this tail. So this is a blow up of this part here. So if I increase A, now this is happening. The distribution, the loss distribution is not the same as the binomial, and the tail is growing. And if I increase A again, now this distribution is as we expect, is like 2 Dirac. Either everything goes well with high probability, or with a small probability, everything goes bad. Right? This is systemic risk. That's exactly what we have in mind when we talk about systemic risk. This is that here, this tail. Right? So on this model, we can exactly explain what's going on. Let's rewrite this model like this. Now it's in the mean field type, right? You see the mean field because you get the average, right? And the way the distribution mu t that René was mentioning is entering here only by the first moment, right? It's the first moment of the distribution. So of course this is a very simple computation, and this is what we have. Now the thing with this model, everything is symmetric. So when I compute the dynamics of x bar of the mean, or the drifts are canceling, and you see that the mean is a Brownian motion, basically, right? Suppose they start from 0, everybody is starting at the same point, right? So you see here that the x bar is a Brownian motion with a small volatility, small diffusion. Of course, it will be sigma over square root of n, right? So which is interesting here is that the ensemble average from physics is acting as a Brownian motion, and it doesn't depend on A. A doesn't do anything. So you want to increase A to create stability of the system, but you just realize that actually the mean can go to the default by its own, on its own probability, and A doesn't do anything. Actually, A does something. If A is very large, and that you are in that event where you go to default, everybody will be there, right? So increasing stability as a price, it increases also systemic risk in some sense, right? So this is the conclusion. So let's work out this model. So this is how it does. So you mean revert to the mean, right? You mean revert to the mean, and this is the small parallel motion that I was talking about. The mean field limit, we know exactly in this case we can compute it by hand. This goes to 0, and you can solve the equation. So this is a solution of the equation, and in the limit n goes to infinity, this xi goes to a Hochstein-Uhlenbeck process with mean 0. Right? The mean goes to 0 in this case. The mean here, the mean goes to 0 right here. And so this is an OU with mean 0. So of course, in the mean field limit, everybody becomes independent. This is propagation of chaos. And everybody is an OU attracted to 0. Of course, it's much more stable than being a Brownian motion, right? If you are attracted to 0 away from the default, then you get stability. Well, this is related to large deviation, of course, because in this case I can compute everything explicitly by this eating time formula. But if I have some nonlinearity in my equation, I will have to rely on more complicated large deviation. So this is what we call systemic risk. We define here systemic risk is a mean attaining the default, and you can compute exactly this probability, right? Well, let me skip that. So this is large deviation. Everybody knows that. That's exponentially small and this is our definition of the systemic event. Let me go fast to a game. So this is again an example. Stability A is large, and so just an illustration. Common noise. I want to show you this slide because this is related to what René was saying, and we will see it in the game. Things are more complicated if you put common noise. In this case, there is no game. Everything goes through. I mean, you can redo the computation we just did. And of course, what you observe is that the correlation now changed completely the picture. The picture is that this probability of systemic event is not small anymore because of the common noise, right? It doesn't go to 0 with n. That's what the common noise tells you. The common noise gives you a probability which is not 0 to go to default, right? So common noise changed completely the picture. Right? Well, and here's the illustration. Here you don't have any common noise. Everything is stable. Here you have common noise, one realization, but this will be a typical realization. Okay, so far we have seen that borrowing and lending create stability in the system. That's perfectly obvious. But there is this systemic probability of systemic risk. Everybody follows everybody, and then everybody goes bad. Right? So now let me just mention two related papers. One with Papanicolaou, Garnier, and Young. They do the same thing. Instead of a linear diffusion, they have a nonlinear diffusion, and you pass. You have a potential, and you pass a pass, right? So, and here what we do in this paper, we break the symmetry. We have borrowing and lending preferences between bank and ING. So I'm just skipping that. But what we are interested is that the banks are doing things, right? They are not following a dynamic. They want to optimize, like René was saying, and maximize profit, minimizing cost. So can we find a model for which we can find a Nash equilibrium? And this is what we have done recently. Okay, so here's a model. So you will see that the model here is basically you could even think about A equals 0 here. You start without any borrowing and lending, and you create a central bank, right? You have your banks, Xi. Just forget about this part here. You create this possibility of borrowing and lending money to a central bank at a rate alpha I, right? You rate the money. So it's liquidity between central bank. Now, if you want to criticize a model, the main criticism is that you borrow and lend and you have no obligations. Well, of course, that's more complicated, and that's work in progress. But let's look at this very simple situation. So you borrow and lend to the central bank. Now, the thing is that, of course, all the banks are minimizing something. You have a running cost and a terminal cost. Let's look at this kind of cost. So this means that you have this cost of transaction, right? That's so you want to minimize that. And this part here is important. This is the incentive to borrow and lend. So, for instance, if the bank I is smaller than X bar, so small bank, A small bank will want to minimize, so it wants to take the alpha I positive. So the small bank wants to borrow from the central bank, right? And the large bank will, as the opposite, the large bank will want to lend to the central bank. This is, you can put this here, this makes this functional convex, so let's forget about this term, and you can have also a terminal objective where the goal here is to minimize, to get everybody together, right? To stability of the system. That is the goal, right? So this is our model, and we want to solve that, right? Well, what do I did? Mean field game. We had an introduction. We know everything about mean field game. We will use the Chinese approach, as quote by René, FBSDE. So you define the Hamiltonian of the system. So this is the Hamiltonian of your system. You have the drift here. You have the objective function, right? Yeah. You minimize the Hamiltonian. So you see where is the optimal. That's the optimal strategy. And then you make an ansatz because we want to solve, so we propose an ansatz. Where this ansatz is from, it's educated. Our model is linear quadratic model. So they think about why this adjoint variable, the adjoint variable is a derivative of the value function. The value function basically is square. It's a square function. I take the derivative, and this is what I get. That's my ansatz. That's the gradient of the value function. So this is my ansatz, but the only thing which is unknown, and I need to solve that problem, is this function, deterministic function eta. So in my ansatz, this unknown deterministic function eta. Okay, so how do we solve that? We write the evolution. So the evolution is given by taking the derivative of the Hamiltonian here. So this is your forward equation. That's a forward equation for the, so this is a probabilistic version of this forward Kolmogorov equation and the backward AJB. And the backward equation for the conjugate variable, the adjoint variable, is given by the derivative of the Hamiltonian with respect to x, with the negative sign because we are going in the other direction of time. So this is initial condition, and this is terminal condition, and the terminal condition is given by what it should be, right? So, and observe, this is a backward equation where you have the unknown in the diffusion. This is part of the unknown. When you solve a backward equation, you need to find those z's which are adapted to the process. So it's a backward equation, but you need to find the z's adapted. So it turns out that we can solve that. And the way to do it is to write the evolution of x bar, and write the evolution of x bar, and differentiate your ansatz. Now you get two equations for the ansatz. Well, you see you have the equation for y, which is given by the backward equation, and you get your equation for y from the ansatz, and you have to match the two, right? You have two decomposition, Ito's decomposition of your y, so you want to match them. If you match the martingale parts, that gives you the z. That's very simple, just identify the Brownian motion, and everything is nice here because this is deterministic, so it has to be adapted, right? So there is no problem of adaptation in this case. And then you match the drift, and you find a Riccati equation for this eta. Linear quadratic, you find a Riccati equation. Well, the thing is that to make sure that you have solved the problem, you need to show that this equation has a solution for all time. And to prove it, I'm writing the solution of it. So this is not to tell you that we know how to solve Riccati equation. It took us a little bit of time to get it right, but we have it. And so if you analyze that correctly, actually, you can show that there is a solution for all time. And this is the interesting part of this formula, that the solution exists, right, in this model. So we have a model here that René presented. It's a very simple form of n players, and we can solve the n players model. We don't have to pass to the limit n goes to infinity. We're in a situation. And observe that n is in this Riccati equation here. This is where n is. That's the only place. When we will do mean field, guess what? You do mean field, n goes to infinity. That should be the solution of the mean field. I will remove that term, right? So that should be but better than that, I want to give you, instead of going to mean field, I want to give you financial implication of what we have found here. Because I think this is more interesting. Is that stop ringing? I'm fine. Okay, financial implication. I think this is the most interesting part of this model. So once you have computed your Riccati, So you know the function eta t here. And the bank I is implementing its strategy. Now look at what the bank I needs to know to implement its strategy. It needs to know eta t, but that's fine. We did the solution, we give that to the bank. They know xi, that's the on position of the bank. What they need to know is x bar, right? That was one part of the discussion. So here I'm assuming that the central bank has that information and give it to the bank xi. The central bank is giving the information, here is x bar, implement your strategy, right? So this is the situation. And so in this case, so that's exactly what I was saying. But what you can observe also is that x bar is still our Brownian motion. It doesn't depend on the solution of the game. So basically what the conclusion of that is that the systemic risk part has not been changed by borrowing and lending with the central bank. It's still the same. The probabilities that the system will crash is the same as before, as without borrowing and lending. That's the first conclusion. The second conclusion is the following. And so where am I now? Well, let me go to the next conclusion because this is more interesting. Now, the dynamics under the equilibrium, under this Nash equilibrium that we just computed, can be rewritten like that. Remember, it was x bar minus xi, but I know that I can rewrite this like this, right? That's the same thing. We know how to undo this equation. So the conclusion of that is that actually the central bank is nothing else than a clearinghouse, right? It's like all the banks exchanging, borrowing and lending at this new rate, which depends on T now. And if you had the previously borrowing and lending rate, you increase the rate of borrowing and lending. So this is a strong conclusion, is that introducing the central bank actually doesn't introduce much. It's a clearinghouse, nothing else. It has to give the information x bar. It plays giving the information, then you increase the liquidity, right? And this is a new rate, effective rate of borrowing and lending. So this is what I was just saying. So I think this may be the most important conclusion of this model. So it creates additional liquidity, and you have this increased liquidity here. Well, if you have a long time horizon, basically if you look at this function eta, all the time it's constant. So basically what you have is a constant rate of borrowing and lending on the long horizon, right, which is written here. So you get your constant rate of borrowing and lending. Well, let me have a couple of minutes. I want to come back to mean field game, exactly what René was saying. So what do we do in this case if I want to treat the mean field game? And I want to solve that and, of course, see that this is a limit of my n-player games. So what do? I freeze the MT. I pretend that the MT is the limit of x bar. Be careful, we have a common noise. So that was the last point of René. When you have a common noise, things are kind of messy. If you don't have the common noise, this is perfectly deterministic. That will be the law of large numbers take place. So this is the law of large numbers, but it depends on, you can condition on W0 if you want. Right? Then what you do, you set up the control problem for one player. So one player is trying to minimize this under this dynamics here. And then, of course, you want to solve your fixed point. You want the expectation of xt to be your MT that you picked at the beginning. So the expectation now is a conditional expectation in W0. Okay? Well, again, write the Hamiltonian. Write the Hamiltonian of this control problem. Minimize the Hamiltonian. Write your forward and backward equation. So this is a forward equation, backward equation with initial condition, terminal condition, and solve that. So solving that actually is kind of easy. First you take expectation in the second equation, you manipulate that correctly, and then you draw some conclusion, and then you go back to the first equation. So this is what we do here. So solving this, and in the case there is no common noise, it's even easier to see, but you can solve this equation by doing this remark here. Right? And then once you have the solution here, well, you solve your adjoint equation, you make an ansatz. So the ansatz is basically the ansatz we have for n players, but now it's in the limit. and you check your two equation for y, identify the two equations. So the thing is basically the same thing, and you get your Riccati equation. That's the Riccati equation at the end. And of course, you see that this Riccati equation is the one that you have n pairs, n goes to infinity, right? Well, basically, this is what we have. And, well, as René explained, what you would like to do is, in case you cannot compute, you cannot solve the n pairs game, then you use this mean field game as an approximation of the n player game. So this is where I will stop.